Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Hey guys, welcome to Luna Geckos channel. I'm G. Those of you that follow us on IG probably know that we've had some adventures in the last couple months. About a year and a half ago, we moved from Las Vegas to Toronto, Canada, and then about 2 months ago, we had to relocate our entire collection, in addition to our entire lives, back to the United States, and now we're down here in Lake Charles, Louisiana. A lot of folks have asked me over the few years that we've been doing this gecko journey, how'd you get started in this whole gecko thing? And it's kind of a long story. I'll try to make it as short as possible, but it really goes back to when I was a little kid. I grew up in a small town in northern West Virginia. It was kind of an idyllic setting. The cool thing about it was right across the street from the house I grew up in, literally you walked across the street and it was woods. And those woods just went on, imagine West Virginia, those woods went on for miles and miles. And we had ponds and creeks and all kinds of stuff to go herping. I didn't know it was called herping back then. I guess we just went out and looked for stuff. And we used to turn over rocks and find salamanders and you know, hunt through the creek and find we called them crayfish. I'm in Louisiana now, so we got to call them crawfish, but same thing. Frogs and toads and all kinds of different things we used to search for. Even at the ponds, one of my favorite things at the ponds every year was, you know, we would get the baby tadpoles and we would put them in mason jars. My mom used to can spaghetti sauce, so she was always surprised to find that I used some of her spaghetti sauce cans or jars to put tadpoles in. We would hatch them. We weren't equipped to keep them or anything, so we would hatch them and then we would let them go back and, you know, up at the pond. And then fast forward, you know, I don't know, a couple years later, I was probably, good guess, maybe 8 or 9 years old, I think, maybe 10. And we were playing stickball out in the yard one day, and one of the guys launched one. I mean, he crushed it. It went over the house, across the street, down into the woods, and I was pitching, so I had to go find the ball. And, you know, so I'm down there digging through the weeds trying to find a ball, and this little garter snake surprised me, and he like snapped at me, scared me to death. So really, from that point on, believe it or not, I was petrified of snakes, because this little, he couldn't have been 2 feet, but, you know, maybe like this wide, and he lunged. I don't even know if he bit me, or if he hit me with a strike, but man, he scared me to death. So from that point on, from about 10 years old, scared to death of snakes. Still into everything else, you know, frogs, toads, salamanders, you know, crawfish, crayfish, whatever you want to call them, loved them. You know, so progress into like elementary school, and I really got into fish, tropical fish, and so my entire bedroom was just set up with all these fish tanks. I had 5 gallons, 10 gallons, 20 gallons. I had tanks everywhere, and I used to breed. I liked live breeding fish, so I used to keep and breed guppies, fancy guppies, black mollies, and we would take them to school, and the science teacher would put them in a tank, and they would be in the science class. So you know, I was kind of into that for years, and then high school happens, you kind of lose track of all that stuff. Well, at the end of high school, I was still afraid of snakes. And I said, man, I got to get over this snake fear. As much as I like animals and love animals and reptiles, I can't go my whole life afraid of snakes. So what anybody afraid of snakes does is, it's being a little bit facetious, this is not what people that are afraid of snakes do. I drive across the bridge over into Ohio, a little pet store over, a specialty exotic pet store over there, and I buy a baby Burmese python. And if you're afraid of snakes, you know, Burmese pythons get pretty big. So this one was not big. He was little. He was only, it was a female. She was only, you know, maybe 2 feet at the time. And I had her, you know, through the end of high school, took her to college with me. She ended up getting to about 5-6 feet. and had progressed. Back then, you couldn't get frozen feeders; you could only get live feeders. And she had progressed her way all the way through mice and worked her way up to full-size adult rats, and was about to progress to bunny time. And being a college student, it was pretty hard taking care of this snake and feeding this snake and still having enough money left over for beer. So ultimately made a decision. I just couldn't keep her anymore. So I took her to the local exotic pet store, and he was able to take her for me. And I sometimes wonder, where she went. Her name was Athena, and I always wonder how she ended up. I would imagine she very well could still be around. If she is, she's a pretty big snake by now. So that's the beginning story of Reptiles, and then it goes from there. Reptiles kind of disappear from my life for quite some time, and then I had kids, and my daughter is just an animal lover. She's actually a gecko breeder as well. Her handle on Instagram is at Soul Geckos. So Luna Geckos, Soul Geckos. There's a funny story about that too, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So my daughter gets into everything. I mean, she has hamsters and mice and ferrets, and had a bunny for a little bit. Really worked her way. Dogs, cats. I mean, all the normal stuff. She's now into birds and geckos, and I think she has a couple arachnids as well. She likes insects too, so she's been on and off with mantises and stuff. But that stuff was always kind of around. Well, at one point about 10-15 years ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, she was pretty little, we got a couple leopard geckos, and we did everything wrong. I mean, we got these things at Petco. They were little babies. We did the setup according to what Petco said. So they were in this tank with an overhead light, and they had the sand, the Repta sand that they told us to get, and screen top. So they were in there secure, because we had a couple cats at the time. And we come in one day, and one of the cats had gotten into her room and got that screen top off. And sadly, we found a tail. One of the geckos had dropped its tail, but neither of the geckos are anywhere in sight. And we were able to find one tailless gecko that was hiding, and we were, somewhere in the room. We were able to get it and put it back in its enclosure. The second one we never found. Don't know. Just one of those things that you can assume the worst, I guess, but we never found him. The second one that survived, sadly, because we did everything wrong, and we had an overhead light, and we had him on sand, and he was just a little baby. He ultimately ate the sand, became impacted, and he died. Or she died. We didn't know how to sex a gecko at that time. So geckos kind of go away. We don't talk about them for a while. We move through ferrets and some other mammals. And then one day, probably about, I'd say 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, she decides that she wants to do geckos again. So we ended up getting a 1-3 group, not all at once. We picked up one here, one here, one here. So we end up with a 1-3 group, and they breed. And those eggs come out. First time we find eggs is like, oh my goodness, look at this. What do we do with them? So, we got to go through all the, all the online stuff and figure out how do we incubate these eggs? How do we ultimately, make sure that these eggs turn into babies? Well, sure enough, after, I guess it was normal incubation time. So we bought, we just bought one of those little styrofoam incubators, and so I don't even remember what we had the temperature on, but you can imagine it was probably mid-80s, because we weren't into like temperature sexing and sex determination at that time. So we wait and we wait and we wait. It seemed like we waited 4.5 years for these geckos to hatch. Now, granted, it was probably 40-45 days. That little nose coming out of that egg, we were hooked, man. We had to do this, and not only with her, so we started, growing her collection and improving her breeding stock, and there were geckos that I was interested in, and I wanted to breed them too, but she didn't really like the stuff that I was into. She was into, you know, tangerines and, you know, just more, you know, more of that direction. I wanted that direction, and I wanted big stuff, right? So I wanted super giants, and, you know, so I went out and I got a few of my own, and that few became more and more and more. And eventually I start producing babies. She's producing babies. She has this whole Luna Geckos thing going. And I got to figure out how to sell these babies. So I started taking pictures, and I would give her the pictures, and I would say, hey, can you post these on your Instagram so you can help me sell some of these babies? And she said, I don't like your photo quality. I can't post those. It's bad for my brand. So what am I going to do? So Luna Geckos, Luna Geckos, I had to start my own Instagram. So we both start taking in gray background. That way we figured we can interchange them on a website. We could do shows together. And that's really where it all started. And so it's been going on for several years now. I would say this will be my fourth pretty serious breeding season. In 2018 would have been what I would say would be my first serious breeding season. 18, I produced 50 or so gecko babies, hatchlings. I doubled it in 19. I produced a little, right around 100. And then last year, in 2020, I produced almost 200, just shy of 200, but also additional species in addition to just leopard geckos. Getting ready for 2021 in our new setup here, which we're going to give you a little tour of. But this year should be the biggest year ever here at Luna Geckos. I think we're gonna probably most certainly double our production from 2020, where we did just under 200 animals. This year, I expect us to be in the 350, 400 range. We have a little bit of work to do here to continue to expand as we're rolling into breeding season. Welcome to Luna Geckos.
It sound right, boy.